Hello everyone, this is step 4 on how to build a gaming PC. So we're first going to start off by putting this plate that you got from your CPU cooler and putting it on the back of our motherboard. We should have done this before we installed the motherboard, but if you made the mistake of putting your motherboard in first like I did, you can just do it this way. It'd be easier the other way, but this way is harder, so I guess it prepares you for both. So basically you just put the plate on like that. Put the fittings in there so they fit smooth and flush with the back. Then you're going to flip it over like this, and then you're going to get your screws that this CPU cooler came with. Mine came with screws that look like this. If you have a heatsink, they might look a little different, or if you have a different CPU cooler, it might look a little different. But for the most part, those will probably be what the screws will look like. So once you have these screws, you're just going to screw them into all four corners just to make sure that's in place. And then after you do that, you're going to grab your CPU cooler like I did just there, and you're going to stick the end through whichever hole you want. I did the right hole because if I did it on the left, it would be, you'd have to like curl the hoses a bunch, and I didn't want to do that. So that is what I did. After you set that in place, you're going to grab your fans that it came with. Again, this would be different for a heatsink, but this is for a liquid CPU cooler. You're just going to grab your fans and match it up with where your screws and screw holes will go. I will do the first screw, and then I'm going to finish the last 7. So as you can see, it's a kind of challenging to get the screws in by yourself, but if you just be patient and work with it, you will get it as I do there. So after you screw in all of those screws, you can move on to the next step, which is putting in the actual CPU cover. So you're going to take the end where the stuff is, and you're going to want to put a drop, like a pea-sized drop of liquid compound onto the CPU or thermal compound onto the CPU just to keep it cool. If you don't do that, the heat will increase by a tremendous amount. So make sure that you put like a pea-sized drop onto the CPU, not the CPU cooler, just onto the CPU. I already pre-installed that, but that's why there's like stuff on it. But if you haven't, just do a pea-sized drop in the middle of the CPU. After that, you're going to screw in those screws into the screws that you already screwed into the back plate for the CPU. And you're going to screw them all in a little bit at a time, and eventually, after a little by little, you're going to have all of them screwed in about the same. That just is so the thermal compound spreads evenly. After that, you can just take a screwdriver and tighten the rest of them just to make sure it's nice and tight. You don't want to tighten it too much, just nice and snug with the CPU so it doesn't break. After that, you can move it around, make sure it's nice and locked in place. And then we can install our fan headers to our CPU, the CPU cooler, and our light into the CPU cooler as well. So the light you just plug into the bottom of the CPU cooler, and then you plug it into your motherboard. It will show you in your user guide where to plug it in at. If you're using this cooler, it will most likely be underneath like how my motherboard was, but it depends on motherboard and CPU cooler. If you look in your user manual, it will show you which is which. After that, you're going to take your fan headers from the fans that you previously installed, and you're going to plug them into one of the cords that the CPU cooler came with. After you install or plug in those cords into the CPU cooler, you're going to then take the second cord that the CPU cooler has, and you're just going to plug it into the back of the case, as I do here in a second, and that connects all the fans so they work. Again, if you have a different case and a different motherboard and a different cooler, it's going to be totally different from what mine is. But if you look at your user manual, it should tell you exactly what you need. But if you are using the parts that we're using in this build, they'll be just like so. Again, if you aren't sure where to plug them in, just look in your user manual and they will tell you everything you need to know. So that is step 4 of building a gaming PC.